Hello, and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. All right. So, hello and welcome everyone to this very, very exciting, very special episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where I'm not sitting down with what anybody could describe as your everyday runner. I know on this show, we talk to a lot of everyday runners who are, doing all kinds of amazing things. But today we have with us Dave Proctor, who is currently the trans-Canadian record holder, who has just in the last couple of years completed the fastest run all the way across Canada. And I'm so excited to have him on the show to talk about, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about lots of really cool things and, everything else that he's accomplished along the way. So thank you so much, Dave, for joining me today. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Absolutely, Stephanie. So happy to be here.
All right. So, you have a book that is out, and so I'm, more familiar with you and a little bit of your story than some of the audience might be. But one thing that was missing from the book was your entire autobiography leading up to that
Mm,
Trans Canada run.
totally,
So
totally.
I wanted to hear more about yourself, kind of your background as a runner, and just tell us your entire life story leading up to the Trans Canada run.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason why I kind of left it out of the book is because the book was lengthy already, right? And so, leading in to, kind of the early stages, it's a lengthy story, but I think all runners kind of have an early story, right? Yeah, my story began when I was younger. I've always loved athletics. After school, I would always be a busy kid, always on my bike, always running. And I remember when I was younger, even in the second and third grade, growing up in High River, Alberta, I would go for jogs after school. And quite quickly, I realized that wasn't normal. Most kids didn't go for a jog after school, but I found it really kind of decompressed and kind of took my energy, my big energy, and kind of sequestered it and made me kind of calm, to a degree. Of course, growing up in Canada, we in early grades, kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, all the way through, we had the Terry Fox run at schools, and that was kind of a big thing at the school. I think that Terry Fox for every Canadian was exemplified what it was to forge on and to have grit and determination and kind of everything that's beautiful about our sport, and ultimately life. I mean, life is hard at times. Life is a bit easier at times, but life is hard, and you have to kind of forge through things. And how do you do that? You take the lessons that Mr. Fox taught all of us. And so I loved running. But back when I was in high school, a long time ago, in my mid 40s now, um, I was a track and field athlete. I was more of a sprinter than anything else. I found that I was better with power and speed than anything else. And in high school, I represented Canada at the World Decathlon Championships. I was a decathlete, so all 10 events in track and field, that including shot put and javelin, all the jumping events, but mostly the 100, 400 meter, 1500 meter and 110 hurdles. And the very best event in track for me was the 400 meter. It was fast, but it took a lot of grit. 100-meter sprint, it's over before you know it. 400-meter sprint, 300 meters in, you find a very ugly part of human existence, and that doubt, that self-doubt, hits you on top of your head with a brick. And I was fascinated by that. To get into that really gritty, ugly part, fascinated me. And so I think that was kind of my early stages with, kind of the relationship with, pain and suffering, and also, beauty in running. No other sport kind of gets you there. No other sport puts you in that place where it's you against you. And I think early on, especially with track and field, I found it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so then, you went from being a track and field athlete as a young person and then, got into ultra running and sort of these longer and longer events. So tell us a little bit more about your accomplishments in that realm and how you made that transition or maybe that leap into becoming going from like a track and field athlete doing these very, very short distances to all of a sudden doing very, very long distances.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the leap was, yeah, it was all it was all with the foundation of curiosity. Um, curiosity. Can people really do that? Is that even humanly possible? And I remember, I took probably about a 3 or 4 year break off of running altogether with track and field and injuries, and starting my massage practice in Calgary. And then there was a patient who came in one day, and he was training for a 100-kilometer race in Lethbridge called the Lost Soul Ultramarathon. And I remember, very, I'll always remember, I even remember his voice because I remember like just like baffled, like, this is the coolest thing I've ever heard of. I've never heard of these things called ultramarathons. And is this even humanly possible? And he even told me, he said, at this event, at this race, there's a 100-mile event. And I said, no, no, that's 160 kilometers. Like, how many people die every year doing this? And are people allowed to do this?
A question we all
And
have.
yeah, exactly. The questions, yeah, for sure. And I became, I don't know, I don't think I slept well for the next many nights because I thought, this is the coolest thing ever. And of course, or this is at early stages of the internet. So you're doing some digging, but not great digging because, digging back then was harder than digging now. And I said, you know what? Let's do it. I had a conversation with my wife and I said, I want to try one of these things. Let's do this Lost Soul 100-kilometer race. And I went ahead and jumped right into it. Now I had my butt handed to me that race. That was so much harder than I thought. I felt like I trained hard enough. I didn't. I thought I was prepared well enough. I wasn't. I knew nothing, but I knew that I wanted to pursue this. At least once. I wanted to see what this felt like. Um, but I remember it took me about 3 or 4 months to recover from that effort, and all the while I was recovering from that effort, um, I had a couple conversations, probably about 3 or 4 conversations with friends about this guy named Al Howie back in 1991, who ran 100 kilometers every day for 72 days across Canada. And I thought that this is like insane. I can't walk, um, a month after, like, I could, but it was hard. And
Yeah.
how on earth is this guy recovering in a matter of hours and doing it every day and over top
Mhm.
of the Canadian Rockies and Northern Ontario? So again, curiosity makes you go like, holy crap. The human condition, the human body is capable of these things, but I haven't adapted to this. And so that started the process of me wanting to do more, and I did more. Every year I was doing more and more, and distances were further and speeds were faster, and I learned more about fueling. I learned more about recovery. I started doing more things right and less things wrong. Um, and then I started, podiuming at races, even at Lethbridge race, and then winning races and setting course records and getting on national teams and then setting national records and then ultimately world records. Um, and then, of course, then you circle back and go, wait 1 second. The beginning of all of this was that curiosity about that Al Howie fella who ran across the country, and I'm running further than he did in 24 hours. I'm running faster than he did in 100-mile racing. Is this something that maybe I'm, capable of doing? And is this ultimately how I kind of round about my career in ultra running? And I had to give it a go.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you and this maybe is a hard question to answer, but Do you feel as though you have a natural ability as an ultra endurance athlete that with just, proper fueling, proper recovery practices, learning about those things that just aren't a factor when we're talking about track and field distances. Do you feel like you have, a natural sort of talent for that sport and you just kind of found what you were sort of built and made to do? Or do you think that, yourself, like so many other runners, we're all sort of equal at the outset, let's say, and just with enough time and dedication, you were able to become the runner that you are today? Like, I guess sort of that nature versus nurture conversation. Where do you kind of feel like that
Mhm.
is for you personally?
I think a bit of both. I think that yeah, I do feel like I'm a natural born athlete. When I was younger, um, and even now, like if I were to pick up a new sport, I would pick it up a lot faster than most others. I think there's a natural, progression when it comes to that, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, I feel like on the onset, I have a bit bigger of an engine than most. But I also feel that there is a lot of lessons that I learned from, my youth. I feel that there is a lot of, big fears. I feel that, you know, I think in the ultra running community, I think you end up having a lot of people that feel that they're never enough, so that they're constantly trying to become something. Like, you please tell me why Courtney Walter every year she wins everything, yet she still doesn't feel like she's enough. Like why she goes out and does better next year, 15 years later, after doing better every year. Like, not that doesn't make any sense, but yet, like good luck convincing somebody that's thirsty of something that they're not thirsty or that they're full. So I think that's a big thing. You're constantly being chased by a tiger. But I think that one of the big things, Stephanie, and you back to the original question about like what kind of sets somebody apart from somebody else maybe is and I don't mean to be trite when I say this, but it comes down to attention. um um like everything in this world is becomes so much bigger or smaller when you draw attention to or away from something, and the ability to do so, I feel, is a bit lost on a lot of the younger community when it comes to cell phones. And like, let's face it, how old are you, Stephanie?
36.
36. So I'm 44. And so when I was younger, mindfulness wasn't a thing. Um,
Yeah. Oh,
like
definitely not.
nobody
Definitely not.
nobody ever spoke about it because, like, well, yeah, you're alone with your own thoughts. That's just what you do. Now everybody is so dialed in that mindfulness needs to become an approach. And I think that, the attention towards something or away from something, every once in a while, just focusing upon your breath when you're suffering. Like, let's say you're doing a big speed interval set, just noticing your breath and just calmly relaxing your face changes everything about your effort in that mere 10 or 20 seconds. And if you could do that for 12 or 14 hours a day across the country, if you could pull yourself away from the realities of this uncomfortable situation, where it's like, well, that wasn't so bad. I think drawing attention to and away from things is is a pretty powerful piece in our sport.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that like I love what you shared about that because I think so often in sport in general and yes, as you said you do, definitely have a sense of being a natural born athlete and I think that there is I mean, we know that there are genetics that go into having some people just be more, having a higher baseline VO2 max, having better running efficiency, being able to build fast twitch muscle fibers more readily than other people. Like we know there are some genetics at play when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
athleticism, let's say. But I love that, you are and in the book you do this a lot too, like adding in that level of inspiration for people to say, okay, maybe we are not all going to run across Canada. And certainly if we were, we're not going to break the record doing it. But to not like sell yourself short on what
Mm,
you could accomplish for you, like, obviously not based on everyone else and what everyone else is out there doing, but, thinking about what could I achieve, what could I accomplish as an individual that's more, or that's bigger or better than what I've done in the past, just from things like looking at your mindset, looking at breathing when you're uncomfortable, and being able to
hmm.
put your attention and focus on those big picture goals. Like, I think it's really cool that even though you're doing things that 99.9% of people aren't going to do, there's still ways that we can all take inspiration from that in our own way.
I think so, and I think to kind of extend that a bit further, it's like you got two wolves, and which one's the loudest is the one that you feed. And
Yeah.
we've every runner has heard this many, many, many times, but yet we fail miserably at this when times get tough. Like I had. And please don't judge me when I say this. I had a really great experience with my girlfriend. We were out down running in Colorado at the Trans Rockies Relay, Trans Rockies Run. And typically I'm up near the front of a race, and but we were kind of in the middle. And every climb that we were climbing, the conversations that were circling were absolutely horrible. Because it was like, oh my God, when is this hill going to end? Oh, my legs are burning. Oh my God. And I'm thinking, look around, like, look at the beauty. Like, do you ever want this to ever end? you
Yeah.
know and it's interesting, the words that we use, we actually, our minds don't know the difference between the bullshit that we're creating and the other. It's a fascinating little thing that we do. And I think we have to be really quite careful with it, and it's easy to
Yeah.
do when everything is easy, but when things
Yeah.
get hard, it's I remember having a really great conversation with a friend the other day, and we were having this debate and this great conversation. He was agreeing with me because he's an incredible ultra runner. Um, and I said the very best efforts, the very best races or events that I've ever had, I never wanted to ever end. Even that, you're like, take a marathon and 35 kilometers in, and if you don't want this to end, you're going to have a great freaking race. If you're
Yep.
looking at your watch and going, oh no, okay, 7 kilometers to go. Can I hold in? I can't wait to get to this finish, and I can't wait to stop. That's not going to be good, man. Think
Yeah.
about a music going on in your kitchen, your favorite song, and you're dancing away, and nobody's around. You're just you're doing the hip move that you always do. Um, do you want that song to end? Are you looking at the timer going, okay, 1 more minute, and then I get to finish dancing? No, you never do that. You never want this to ever end. A beautiful kiss with your partner, like, you never want that to ever end. Why
Yeah.
would you want a run to end?
Yeah, absolutely. And just that sort of small mindset shift of like always looking for the gratitude in every
Mm,
situation, and looking for, just I'm currently in sort of the first year of parenthood. I had
mm.
twins at the end of last year. And
Congrats.
thank you. And as I'm reading your book, like, just all of the mindset stuff that you're talking about, and the very first chapter, you talk about like the brain's ability to like remember suffering and stuff
Yeah.
like that is very poor, and you think back to those like newborn days, and they're so foggy now, and you think about them
Mm,
with such like, kind of wistfulness, in a way that when you're in it, it's such chaos. And so much of this does remind me of that early parenthood journey of,
mm.
you're in it every day, and, you're trying to find those moments of gratitude and positivity, and, turning all of these really hard situations into positive things, because I think without it, like, it's so much more suffering than it needs to be. And like you
Oh,
said, like, not waiting for it to be over, and counting down the minutes until you're out of this phase or out of this stage, but really like turning it into like not wanting it to ever end. And not that I was good at that in the beginning, but once you are able to do that, like, it just makes the
yeah.
whole thing so much more beautiful.
Well, and I find, and I agree, and I think that, early stages of parenting, especially twins, good for you. You're running an ultra marathon right now. Is so much. There's so many parallels because I
Yeah.
think pain
Oh,
is
so many.
pain is inevitable. Suffering is a choice.
Yep.
We choose to suffer. And sometimes I hear people complaining about, oh my God, this and this and this, and everybody starts complaining back and forth. I'm like, what are you doing? Like
Yep.
there's, three, certainties in life is uncertainty. Another one is pain, and another one is a tremendous amount of hard work every day for the rest of your life. And
Yep.
accept it. If you can't accept that, then what are you doing? You're going to be miserable every day for the rest of your life. We all know that person. Come on, Stephanie. We both have a friend who's like, miserable and complaining about their partner and complaining about work and we don't want to be that guy.
Yep.
Like, don't be that guy, right?
Yeah.
And just go like,
Yeah.
hey, you know what? Yeah, politics are not ideal. Money is a bit tight. Cool, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, my run wasn't a great run today. And it's cold outside. So what? Every year it's going to get cold.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly.
yeah.
But it's funny, and just like you were mentioning with that race that you were doing recently, it sort of sucks you in, like when you're hearing
Mm,
negativity and especially during hard efforts and whether that is during an ultra race or during those early stages of parenting, like whatever is hard in your life at the moment. As much as there is value in sort of being heard and being able to like have honest conversations about our struggles and everything like that, I think we need to
mhm.
be very mindful of where is that crossing that barrier into sucking us into that sort of black hole of negativity. And
Yeah,
yeah, like that's a tricky thing, and I think that's just again one of those like mindset shifts and one of those pieces that we need to be very like aware of and just know when we're kind of getting into that rut.
totally, totally. And I think that, you allude to a little bit in this, my book as well, too, where there's a chapter where I go on about, the mind only always chooses survival over top of reward.
Yeah.
And, you know, our ancestors 20,000 years ago wouldn't go and run a marathon because you don't know where the next meal is coming from, or comfort, or yeah, like all the things you wouldn't do this. Nowadays, you've got a fridge full of food. You've got a heated home, you've got a comfortable bed, and we all have an extra 5 to 10 pounds of percentage pounds of fat on our bodies that we could eat away at, and so it is not survival anymore. And so I think that oftentimes with one another, we start to, oh my goodness, I'm in survival mode, and it becomes a thing, and you're like, and we have to pull ourselves back and go, well, hold on, no, 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 we're in a reward mode right now. We're not in a survival mode. We're thriving. And in fact, this is how we end up gaining a better life, is going out and choosing discomfort. I think that's the key for surviving the comfort crisis that we're in, is pushing on the side of pain and going, I'm going to choose my pain. I don't want my pain to choose me. I don't want to be that guy who's 100 pounds overweight with back pain. I want to be the person that's choosing my discomfort during my run, where I'm like, whew, my hamstrings are burning because this climb is steep, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So speaking of pain and suffering,
Mm,
you mentioned in the book, you kind of had this team of professionals that you were working with along the way, um, giving you some guidance. You were able to meet up with them a couple of times and stuff like that. I mean, what you were doing, what you were going through was very intense, very extreme. And I mean, for me, like, as a dietitian, if I were your dietitian as you were doing this and you were telling me some of the things you were going like, all of those sort of personal and professional sort of ethics and stuff like that would kind of say like, this is not good. You need to stop. My
mm, mm,
professional requirements are to tell you that this is a bad idea. You should not be doing this.
mm.
How do you kind of put together a team of people who are on board with what you're trying to accomplish and prepared for guiding you through that? Like, are these individuals who have a lot of experience with these sort of extreme ultra endurance events, or are they people that you've worked with for such a long time that they just know you well enough that you're all kind of on the same page with things? Like, how do you put together that team for that kind of event?
I think two things. Number one is curiosity. Again, I try to only align myself with people that aren't rigid in their thoughts, that, ultimately, aren't stuck on a bias and say, well, no, 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 this is what this is. It's like, well, yeah, let's give it a go. Let's
Mhm.
see. Um, and we had a lot of really good full disclosure conversations beforehand.
Mhm.
And it's tricky because it's an n equals one.
Yeah.
I mean, yourself as a dietitian, if you're somebody to come in your office and say, well, what do you think about this? Oftentimes it's a lot of a similar discussion point, or these things aren't. It's like, and even my dietitian was saying, like, you know what, it comes down to having a wide variety of foods, because you're going to at the end probably hate half of them. So having an elimination diet leading in is going to cause trouble. But even my sports psychologist, finding a sports psychologist that aligned with me. The very greatest, best thing about Erin Zielinski, my sports psychologist, who I have got an appointment with tomorrow, is that she's the first to admit, and probably no, of course, sports psychologists would never say they have all the answers, but she says I have very little answers, but let's go and
Mhm.
explore them together.
Yeah.
Um, and she's such an interesting open book that you get there and you realize that she didn't really help you get there. You got there on your own, but yet you just discovered what that was in the means of. I'm not even talking about sport, but by talking about life and love and fears and anxieties and um, our one of our tricky things right now is this whole concept of enough. And an endurance athlete, it's kind of a mainstay in life, in a personal life. You're like, I am enough. I should be enough. Ultimately, in sport, you're never enough. You need to go do more core work. You need to go do more speed interval sets. There is a tiger chasing you, and you need to get stronger. So ultimately, I think that you look at a team and you build it based upon the curiosity that you have as well too. Your best qualities, you want them it to mirror, for them as well too, when it comes to physiotherapists or chiropractors or sports psychologists or dietitians, somebody who's willing to move with you, and not, but because let's face it, ultramarathoning too is such an early sport. The idea of eating, like, it's more of an eating contest than a running contest. And so
Yeah.
for somebody to say, oh, no, 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 this other athlete eats a high fat diet, you should do the very same. I'm sorry, hey, try it out in training for sure. But maybe that dietitian isn't the right dietitian for you. Maybe it's somebody who's going to look at your past and go, what's worked and what hasn't worked. How do
Yeah.
we end up increasing your caloric density, or your intake from 200 grams to 300 grams? Maybe, hey, let's have a stretch goal of 400 grams in the future, or calories.
Yeah.
Sorry, calories. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think too, like you said, I mean, you're an N of one, especially, and like we're all an N of one at the end of the day, but like especially in this scenario, I mean, we don't have a stack of research papers to go back and to say, okay, this is what we should do, this is how we navigate things. And I think it's really important for people to understand that, like, you know, research is great. And there's, obviously a huge role for science to play in a lot of the decision making that we do in sport, in nutrition, in many, many fields. But there's also this sort of gray zone of, we may not have research on it at the moment. We may not have answers to this particular question that are based in science at the moment, because just no one's done that research. Like, it doesn't mean the answer is
Mm.
no, or that something doesn't work. It's just not every question has been answered by science and will honestly never be answered by science. But just kind of knowing like where that ends, and where you're transitioning to just going beyond what answers we do have. I think when we know
Hmm.
where that is, it's so much easier to have, like you said, those very sort of honest and direct conversations about, okay, well, this is what we're going to try. We don't know if it's going to work, but all we can do is try and go from there.
Yeah, and I think that ultimately, and back to, kind of dietitians and the very real, like, let's face it, over 80% of ultra endurance runners, at the end of a, let's call it, 100-mile event, if you look at the failure rates, the reasons why people are blowing up at the end and not finishing their event, or finishing, well past what their goal times were, it's all gastrointestinal. Um,
Mhm. Mhm.
and so, like, let's walk that back. Why are we running up mountains in order to gain strength and ability to run up mountains better, but we're not running with a full gut in producing an ability for gastric emptying? I think the evidence points that we can train that.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
uncomfortable,
absolutely.
but so is running up a mountain. Like,
Yeah.
that's uncomfortable. I think
Yeah.
everything that's worth doing in life becomes quite uncomfortable. And so
Yeah.
eat a bean burrito and get out for a run. And get to a point where you're like, this doesn't feel right. Perfect. Great. There might be some more
Now
capillary
do it
growth.
10 more times and then it will feel
Yeah,
right.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Never waste an opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's really good, and I think that as ultra running becomes more and more popular, because I mean, certainly, like no one can deny that it is. This
Mm-hmm.
idea of fueling your body for these sports just becomes so much more of a non-negotiable. Like, you
No.
see a lot of people, even up to the marathon distance, who will say, I see this all the time on, in different like online communities and stuff. Oh yeah, I run a marathon fasted. I don't eat anything. You don't need to eat anything before
Mm-hmm.
you do a half or something like that. And like, for some people that may be the case. Like, I'm not denying that a person could run a
Mm-hmm.
marathon or lots of distances without fueling. But for, most people, if they want to perform well, not DNF, manage their digestion, stay hydrated, like avoid potentially very dangerous situations,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about the nutrition and the hydration and just incorporating that into training for these things becomes so much more critical than it does if we're just racing maybe 5 or 10 Ks.
Absolutely, and I get it. The human condition is that, no, 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 I'm good enough. I'm good at that. You're probably not good enough. Like, it's next level stuff.
Yeah.
The idea of running a race and eating a big honkin' cinnamon bun or a big sandwich or something. If someone says, "Oh, that turns me off," well, then you're not there yet. That this is what this needs to be,
Yeah.
in order for this, for I get it. We all want, what's that saying? Everybody's jealous of what you got, but nobody's jealous of how you got there, or what
Yeah.
you had to do to
Totally.
get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, gastrointestinal discomfort while you're running is pretty uncomfortable,
Yeah.
followed by all of the, let's call it, some upset stomach stuff that happens.
Yeah.
Nobody likes throwing up. Nobody likes having, you know, terrible diarrhea. But
Yeah.
sometimes it happens. And I would rather have that happen in training than on race day any day.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. So, going into this, you talked a little bit about in the book about, going through this process of training your gut and kind of getting out there and eating, you'd say like you would eat a big meal and then go for a run just because you ate this big meal, so you may as well go for a run and tell us a little bit more about that process that you went through. And was it for just ultra running in general for you, or was it in preparation specifically for the Trans Canada Run?
A bit of both. I mean, Trans-Canada Run, I knew was going to be next level because you're
Mhm.
stacking 6,700+ kilometer runs back to back. And even as I say that now, 2 years, 2+ years following the effort, you're like, bloody hell, that's so stupid. Why would anybody do that? But I knew that the fueling that was taking place on day 10 really ultimately was for day 20. Um,
Mhm, mhm.
and you can't fall behind. But the problem is you can't really get ahead, um, just because of the caloric burn was so freaking high.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I garnished success with being a very good eater in 100K, 100 mile, 6 day, 24-hour efforts.
Yeah.
So, I trained my gut for those events, not necessarily knowing it was going to lead to a transcon.
Yeah.
But then ultimately, what was a skill set for those events became a very strong skill set for the big event, the
Yeah.
transcon. Ultimately, because I still ended up losing 20 pounds over the run. I was thinking I was going to lose 30 to 35. And I felt like I was at a good enough weight to begin with that I could lose 35 pounds. And so I still had some weight to lose, meaning I won at the eating game. I
Yeah.
did quite well. But it was a lot of force feeding, and I don't think that I could have force fed myself if I didn't prepare myself. So a lot of it was getting my body used to taking in a lot of shit food. And I know it sounds so stupid, but yeah, you need good food in your diet.
Yeah.
You need I eat a very, very healthy diet. Like all the nutrients I feel are there. Every once in a while, like especially when you're training often, and you've got the nutrients in, and you've done all. Hey, I've got my 160 grams of protein in a day. Um, it might be a good idea to eat some shit food tonight, right? Um, and it sounds so stupid, but taking a bit too much of it, and feel a bit uncomfortable with it. Um, if you're training a lot, you're probably not going to gain weight, but it's not. You can't run across the country by aiming away from junk food. Junk
Yeah.
food is where the big calories are.
Yeah.
The idea of a milkshake right after every run, like milkshakes are like a calorie bomb.
Yeah.
And come on, they're so like they go down your throat, and it's just like, dear Lord, this feels good.
Yeah.
I think all of your listeners who are runners, know that like that thick feeling
Oh,
of
especially
drinking
on a hot
milkshake.
day.
Oh yeah, but then ultimately, what I would do is I would drink half the milkshake, and then I would take liquid whipped cream, and I would top it up, and then drink
Yeah.
it again.
Yeah.
Because liquid whipped cream is, you'd know better than I would. It's like, I forget how many grams of fat.
35%,
Whew,
35%
like
fat.
that's insane, but
Yeah. Yeah.
it's delicious.
Yeah.
I did it a couple times where I put too much liquid whipped cream in, and the results were pretty disastrous in the toilet later on.
Oh
But
boy.
because you're kind of sorry, I have listeners, I should have disclaimed that.
We no,
But
we can talk. We're all friends here.
yeah,
We can
yeah,
say all the
we've all been
things.
there.
Yeah,
But
everybody
yeah,
knows.
and you would know that, I forget the terms, but when you overdo fat in one, and it's like something, I forget what the word is, but it's like there's this like, whoa, nope, we can't
Yeah.
do that in the gut, and the gut just moves, and you're like, okay, I overdid it.
Yeah.
But I would
Yeah.
rather get close to overdoing it than underdoing it during an event like that.
Well, and that's just the thing, right? And you said a couple of really great points there that, for people who are, you know, ultra runners and even just like high volume runners in general, like you don't necessarily have to be training for an ultra for this to apply to you. But I mean, what we see in endurance sport is rampant underfueling. And for two
Mm-hmm.
reasons, right? Like people are always trying to lose weight, and so they're always trying to eat less and move more. And obviously, there's a point at which that is not going to be beneficial when it comes to performance and even seeing those improvements in body composition. But like you said, you reach your nutrient targets for the day. You get in your protein, you get in your fiber, you get in your vitamins and minerals. Like you've checked off all the boxes. You can only get in so many calories from fruits and veggies. Like that's only going to
Mm-hmm.
get us so far if we're trying to eat
Yeah.
super, super, quote unquote, healthy all the time. There is a point at which we need more processed foods. We need more fat and sugar and readily
Yeah.
available, easily digestible calories to meet these higher needs. We can't just
Yeah.
get whole, unprocessed, high fiber foods in at a certain calorie demand. It's
Totally.
too much and it's really really difficult to do that. So if you are a higher volume runner and you're trying to fuel these types of weekly training miles, get comfortable with the idea that yeah, you're going to be, eating some Fruit Loops and some ice cream
Mm-hmm.
and pizza pops, I don't know, whatever you like, doesn't matter.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Whatever your thing is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And have lots of it on, I get it. We feel guilty, but and Stephanie, I'd be curious to hear what you think about this when it comes to weight loss and, running and over. I've always felt that, your weight loss target isn't a season. It's not, a 6 month block. It's a 5 year block. And, ultimately you over 5 years, you're going to lead like organically, like 3 pounds a year or 5 pounds a year for 5 years is 25 freaking pounds. That's a lot of weight. So do you feel that sometimes the weight loss goals are a bit compressed versus kind of a 3, 6 year block where it's like, okay, well, let's look at your weight loss over that 6 years versus over the 6 months?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, like everybody who wants to lose weight wants to lose as quickly as possible, right? And
Of
I think
course,
that
yeah.
that's one of the biggest mistakes that runners in particular make is that they're trying to simultaneously usually train for an event while
Hmm.
also losing, sometimes like 10, 15, 20 pounds at the same time. And this
Hmm.
is where it becomes really, really challenging because we're looking at needing to fuel those higher volumes of training. So yes, we need more calories, and you would think that well, I'm automatically going to create this massive deficit with all of this running, but
Hmm.
you're also needing to fuel that recovery and all of the appetite changes that go
Hmm.
along with the higher running volume make it just a really delicate balancing act that some people seem to, when they start running more, they don't see that increase in appetite, the sort of that slingshot in appetite that causes them to actually end up over consuming. And so they do see some weight loss when they increase their volume, and it kind of goes hand in hand without a lot of intention or sort of thought on their part. But for
Hmm.
most runners, the increase in appetite is more, and some of this is psychological too. Definitely, we see this sort of overabundance of appetite over and above what we're burning in terms of those calories, and so we're
Totally.
actually better off aiming for changes in body composition. I'm always, we always want to aim for fat loss, of course, not muscle loss. Seeing
Hmm.
those changes in body composition actually in between races, in the off season, base
Totally.
building, that sort of thing. Otherwise, people are getting injured, they're exhausted, they're not performing well, they hate training and running. Like you said, they're staring at their
Yeah.
watch the whole time, can't wait for this to be over because it's so much harder than it needs to be
Yeah.
because I'm not properly fueled.
No doubt. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, that psychological component of like, why do I feel like crap all the time? I hate this.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it long term, I don't think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially if we keep seeing, recurring injuries, lots of issues that come, as soon as I increase my volume, I cut down my calories and I'm in this really big deficit and now I'm getting hurt and I just can't seem to like find that rhythm of actually enjoying running long enough to be consistent with it. And if we
Totally.
can shift our thinking away from this focus and this sort of preoccupation with weight loss,
Yeah.
look at how do we fuel for like enjoyment of running, how do we fuel for better performance, how do we improve body composition, build muscle while we're doing this, then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I actually can enjoy running. And yeah, maybe over the next 6 years, 7 years, whatever, the scale might drop as we go well, and I'll see that change in body composition that I'm aiming for. But if it's the main priority and the main focus, it just keeps us
Hmm.
really stuck in the short term.
Yeah. And I think it cycles around. Myself personally, I know when my training is building, and, I'm hitting, 100-mile weeks, 150-mile weeks. Um, let's face it, yeah, I gotta sleep. So I've got 16 hours a day that you're awake. I've got to work. So you're typically not eating while you're working. And so um, I'm spending more time running and less time eating. Sometimes I'm skipping a
Yep.
meal because you're busy getting in a 3 or 4 hour effort.
Yep.
And so then you start pulling back on, wait 1 second. Those times that I'm not running, I'm eating. Like if you're not eating, you're sleeping. If you're not sleeping, you're running.
Yeah.
And it becomes you have to make it a priority. Your run's a priority. You could say, oh, my stretching, my core work is a priority. I think your eating has to be just as big of a priority.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. Otherwise, yeah, you're like you said, you're just not gonna be able to do it for very long.
Hmm.
Um, you mentioned in the book that your kind of target was about 9,000 calories per day was the goal that you were looking to achieve there. And, in terms of how you organized your fuel and organized your daily food, like I know you mentioned you just need to be mechanically eating all the time. Like there's no
Hmm.
thinking about
Hmm.
it. There's no what do I want? Am I hungry? Am I not hungry? Like I don't care if you're hungry. You need to put something in your mouth right now.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
how did you sort of organize that? Like did you look at it from the perspective of okay, this is how I'm going to organize my 9,000 calories a day, and I need to finish these 9,000 calories every day? Or is it a little bit more of like a looser goal? You kept an eye on your weight to kind of know if you were on the right track, or was it just that you have enough experience as an ultra runner to kind of know where you were at with things, or what were some of the logistics around the nutrition strategy?
Yeah, the latter. I think that one thing I didn't want out there was stress.
Fair enough.
And I didn't want to feel like, oh no, I should be doing this. Oh no, I'm having guilt around this. I'm not meeting up with my targets. I'm not, and even that, the very same thing with heart rate. Um, I knew that I need to stay in zone one and that aerobic threshold. I don't think I hit it once in the entire 67 days.
That's
Um,
incredible. Even climbing mountains.
yeah, and so you're climbing and you're like, oh, I'm walking now because you feel it. And I know now in my mid 40s, I know like doing this in my mid 30s, my ego would have gotten the better of me, like, no, I could run this climb.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't, right?
Yeah.
And so you pull it back and you just listen to your body because, who cares if you're walking a climb? It's about that heart rate, and you do not want to enter that place. Very same thing with food, though. I think that it was a loose target.
Yeah.
I also didn't want to weigh myself, but you looked in the mirror and you knew. You're like, oh, okay, the last couple of days I have been slacking,
Yeah.
or you're in Northern Ontario and there's no good bakeries. Let's face it, sometimes when there's good bakeries around, I'm
Yeah.
eating more. And when there's bad bakeries, I'm eating less. You're not
Yeah. Fair enough.
motivated by.
Fair enough.
Sometimes I like a beautiful lemon square or cinnamon bun or a scone, and you're like, dear Lord, I will take three of those to go.
Yeah.
And you're eating and running and eating at the same time. Um, so it was a loose goal, and I didn't want. I knew I needed to. I knew I
Yep.
need, and I knew when I was close. I knew I was never going to hit 9, but that was the stretch. I didn't want to say, "Oh no, I want to hit 7," and then you get to 7, you're like, "Oh, that's good enough." No, there's more. There's always more.
Yeah.
Like even at night, you eat, you pause, you take a break, and then you eat more when
Yeah.
you feel like you're not gonna. Sorry, this sounds terrible. That you're not gonna vomit. You
Yeah.
you you let it digest a bit when there's a bit more space, and then you go at it again.
Yeah.
Same thing, having food beside your bed. You wake up in the middle of the night. I was hungry every night at midnight, and so you just fork as much in your mouth. You take in a couple protein drinks, and you go back to bed, and your stomach just empties throughout the night. So it was very loose. I didn't want to have any food guilt. And the food guilt that I would feel would be you're not doing enough.
Mhm. Mhm.
But I also knew that I needed a stretch goal of that 9,000 calories, which I knew wasn't obtainable, but I wasn't going to feel bad if I didn't get it, but I
Yeah.
would aim for it knowing very well that, oh, hey, I have a cinnamon bun. I'm just going to take, peanut butter and smear it all over top because that gives me an extra 400.
Yeah.
So things like that. Like I didn't want stress to be a part of the thing, so I eliminated stress where I could. But I knew I had a realistic goal because if it didn't stress myself enough, I wouldn't get anywhere close.
Yeah, yeah, and I think for, like, people who have done I mean, even just, shorter race distances, but definitely in the ultra running space. I mean, everyone kind of knows the taste fatigue. They know the
Mm,
the gut and the brain do really funny things with appetite during intense exercise and stress and all of that kind of stuff. So, for you with all of this experience kind of going into it, knowing what to expect and knowing what your body and your brain and your gut were all gonna do, you can
Hmm.
plan for those different scenarios and kind of work around them because obviously you know yourself best and you know what's gonna work for you, like trying to source every bakery across Canada.
Oh yeah, yeah, running from one bakery to the next, and to what, to extend from that a little bit as well too. I think they all kind of circle back to one another. I knew I was in zone one when I had cravings for everything.
Interesting.
You know,
Interesting.
if I was racing a marathon, I craved nothing. I
Yeah.
don't want anything because you're in zone three. And nobody wants to eat. Your body is miraculous. Your brain, your gut, it tells you, hey, no, or hey, yes, right?
Yeah.
And so the moment that I started feeling like I was like not craving a beautiful thing like a cinnamon bun, I was like, oh, okay, I'm climbing to the top end of zone one, and maybe I should pull it back a bit.
Yeah.
So I think that oftentimes, you know, with wearable technology, with everything, with Google Maps for crying out loud, we get away from actually looking at your surroundings and knowing where you're driving. And your body knows what it needs. If you're craving something, there's a good reason why you're craving that. I think often, most of the time, especially when you're doing something like that. So
Yeah.
if I was not craving food, it's like, oh, you're pushing it. Let's dial it back. I'd rather be out there for an extra hour with less of an effort than the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. And especially when, like you said, like this isn't just a one-off thing. You're doing this the next day and the next day
Mm-hmm.
and the next day.
Mm-hmm.
And, something that a lot of runners don't think about with their fueling is it's not just a matter of eating the calories that you're burning right here in this moment or right here on this run today. It's we're also needing to fuel the recovery and,
Mm-hmm.
having to keep up with that nutrition sort of day after day after day so that you're
Yeah.
not digging that hole that so deep that you eventually can't get out of it. And it's just interesting, some of the things that you've mentioned, some of the strategies of the way that you added calories, stuff like that. It's just taking me back to like my clinical dietitian brain. And I know if there's any clinical hospital dietitians that are listening to this, like you all are thinking about those patients that have these extremely high calorie needs,
Mm.
different disease states and different things that can happen to people that just dramatically drive up their energy requirements. And it's funny that all the things that you're doing are like the exact same things that we would do in those scenarios for those patients.
That's so funny. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, the adding something to something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Bacon,
How do
whipped
we stack?
cream.
How do we
Yeah.
stack something? I remember
Totally.
during the first effort across Canada in 2018, um my mother would fry up 1 pound of bacon a day. And it was fun to snack away at bacon all day.
Yeah.
And you're like, but that's dense. That's
Yeah.
insane. But who doesn't like bacon? Well, yeah, a lot of people don't like bacon, but I love
Yeah.
bacon. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, food logistics is kind of one thing, and obviously a huge part of your success was needing to fuel yourself as you do all of this, but you know the process of like planning
Mm.
for a transcontinental run, like how do you even begin that process of like assembling resources, assembling the team, planning, budgeting, like all of it together. I mean, there's like we said, there's not a lot of people doing this. So there's not a lot of
Hmm.
books you can read or articles that you can read that are going to help
Yeah.
you. So tell us a little bit more about like how you went about even getting started with preparing for this.
Oh, that's a lengthy story, but I'll shorten it up as much as I can because there
Yeah.
were two efforts. There was one in 2018, and that was a fundraising effort for the Rare Disease Foundation and the organization that I founded, Outrun Rare. And that was a lot more convoluted because it was also a fundraising campaign, and there was a lot more costs. There were a lot more moving parts because and a lot more public facing because your goal is to raise $1 million and public awareness and for rare disease for charity. I truly believe that this record across Canada will never stand as long as somebody's doing it for charity. Simply because you can't do both.
Yeah.
Um, you the amount of energy it took. be out there on the phone all day. And also, like you got up every morning and you had to run. You didn't want, it wasn't for you. You had to
Yeah.
do this for somebody else. And that's a big thing. And that was, so there was a lot of sponsors. There was a lot more cost the first time with Outrun Rare.
Yeah.
The costs were almost triple the amount,
Wow.
simply because you had wrapped RVs. It was a spectacle.
Yeah.
It was this big show that we were putting on. There were press releases. It was over the top. There were all these sponsorships with these, getting thousands of shirts made, selling them in Staples events all over. Like, for crying out loud, it was. I look back at it now. I'm like, how did I think that was an okay idea to do both, break a record and
Yeah.
do this?
Yeah.
Um, and so um, it was a lot of, I think both efforts were a lot of trust exercises with friends, getting sponsors, and motivating people to get involved. A lot of people would never run across the country, but they would love to support somebody running across the country, especially a friend or
Yeah.
a family member.
Hmm.
And handing over and saying, okay, what do you think? What can we do here? How can we, you know, drive awareness for the Rare Disease Foundation? How do we organize events? How do we, hey, you've got a great, amount of experience with this, sequestering sponsors. Can you help me out with this? There was this beautiful friend of mine who, she was doing all this logistics for these, for the film companies. For whenever there's a film being made, there's like a million
Okay.
things that are happening.
Great.
She was the heading up my logistics, and you're like,
Okay.
thank God,
Yeah.
because she sees things and talks to the government and roadways and things that I would never think of. I'm an
Yeah.
idiot runner. She's a brilliant logistics planner.
Yeah.
I can't do this. She did that.
Yeah.
She's like, Dave, I don't know anything about running, but I can do this. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I love you. Thank you. And so
Yeah.
I think it's having 20 or 30 people around you that are willing to put their skill sets and love for you ultimately, and um, time, a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because I think that a lot of time people don't want to go do these big things, but they want to be a part of the big things that are happening. Does that make
Hmm.
sense?
Hmm. Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so, like, oftentimes we love these people that are like, hey, I've got this idea. Let's build a new car company called Tesla. And, there's that one person who has a moonshot mindset. We love moonshot people, right? And so these people gather around that person.
Yeah.
And it's amazing once something gets rolling, the amount of sponsors that come forward, the amount of all the things that get put into place. The hardest part I found personally was mapping, of,
Oh, yeah.
of doing the mapping with Google Maps across the country. And when you're mapping and how far it is from this town to this town, you're like, oh, that's a day, man. Then things get a little bit hairy, then you're like, oh, this is getting real.
Yeah.
It's easy to
Yeah.
go to all your friends and say, I'm going to run, a marathon. Um, Go and drive it. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh no,
Yeah.
I put
Takes a
this out
long
on
time.
Instagram, like this is not good. So, but then doing that mapping makes you more accountable. So I think there is no such thing as a self-made man or woman. There's a whole village of people holding up that
Yeah.
person and doing the things necessary with the skill sets that they have. Um, and to all my friends and sponsors, I love you, and I thank you so much for all your efforts with helping me out
Yeah.
with this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like you said, there's sort of that person who has the idea or the vision, but I would say rarely, if not never, does that same individual have all of the necessary skills
Yeah,
to like bring
yeah,
that idea to fruition. Like it needs to
hmm
be sort of that team effort, like everybody with their different skills, different things to offer in order to make it happen because we
Oh,
aren't all good at everything.
well, and that reminds me of that whole quarantine backyard ultra crap, because I was, one of the people who came up with that concept.
Yeah.
And that was right after the 2020 effort.
Yeah.
got dropped. We were ready to go run across Canada again in 2020.
Yeah.
And then, of course, COVID, this
Yeah.
thing happened. And, then we're like, okay, well, what do we do with all of our energies? So we end
Yeah.
up compiling a group of 6 people that had very specific skill sets. We said, okay, concept to completion within 2 weeks. And on Zoom, we put together a backyard race. Um, and it was huge. Like it was
Yeah.
so rad that we were able to do this. But it was like, hey, you know, anything is possible.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about a community, but also reaching out and saying, "Hey, can you give me a hand?"
Yeah.
And as well too, you have 1/6 ownership in this, so make it your own. Like put your stamp on this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So if you were to ever do something like this ever again,
Hmm.
is there anything that you would do differently? Like, do you have anything? I mean, maybe you would do this again one day. I don't know. I kind of feel like that's a one and
Hmm.
done sort of scenario. But is there anything that you would change if you were to do it all over again?
No. Yeah, I feel like it was perfect.
Yeah.
Um, and I have a feeling there's going to be there's a movie that's been made. There's a documentary film crew that followed me across the entire way, and it's now going out to all the film festivals all over the world, and we're doing a private screening. But it's amazing when you watch it. I didn't, Stephanie, you shake your head when I say it. I didn't struggle the whole time, not
Yeah.
once. There were days where you're like, oh, okay, I'm a bit more tired, but there was never once like, I don't think I'm going to be able to do this. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that was because I nailed it. Um, the nutrition, the mindset, the pacing, the zone one, the crew members having people on every 1 to 2 weeks and they fly out because they're sick and tired of you and you're sick and tired of them. And then you bring in somebody new and you're like, oh my God, I
Yeah.
love you because your energy is so different and this is great. And then
Yeah.
they fly out and then the next person comes in and you love them now. And before you know it, you're in Victoria and that's that. No, I think, and I know that when I'm 80 years old, looking back upon this, I freaking nailed it, and
Yeah.
that's a cool feeling. And I kind of don't want to do this again because I don't want to ruin this. Like there's other
Yeah.
countries. There's other big things. I would like to get back to competitive ultra running. But no, no, in 2022, I got all of these friends who say, "Oh, back when I was in high school, I hit the most home runs on my team," or I had my glory day, and that was 2022, and that feels pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, that's so wonderful. And obviously to accomplish the goal is one thing, but to also look back on it and just like really truly have no regrets. Like
Oh,
it's just such
yeah,
a great kind of nice finish to it. And it's
yeah,
funny that you sort of say and you had mentioned before like not ever wanting a run to end. Like
yeah.
that's how I felt actually reading the book. This is so funny. But like, I started reading the book and I'm a pretty fast reader. So I was getting through it pretty quickly, got to where you had finished running through Ontario. And like
Mm,
Ontario, the biggest province, the longest province, the most days were spent
hmm.
there. And then all of a sudden it was like boom, boom, boom. You were like hitting Alberta. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is almost over. Hang on, like I
Mm.
need to slow down. I started only letting myself read like 1 or 2 chapters a day.
Yeah.
So I
Oh,
could
funny.
space it out. And then you're
Totally.
like getting to the end and I felt maybe how you felt actually doing the run where it's like you so badly want this to be over and have kind of that nice bow on it and to complete this massive goal you have, but at the same time, like not wanting it to be over.
Yeah,
Like it was just
yeah.
such a
And
weird mix of emotions.
when that was a weird, and you picked it up right because when I was writing the book, and I was writing the chapters and the progression the way I was feeling,
Yeah.
and by the time I got to Manitoba and Saskatchewan, like you got to remember though, if you're running 700 and whatever kilometers a week, the base build from 1 week to the next to the next to the next is unfreaking real. Like you will never be that fit ever in your life. And there was very little, if not no fatigue at the end of every day. And so by the time I got to Manitoba, I thought, this country isn't big enough. Like I want to run to Mars.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I don't want this feeling to ever end because I feel so strong and capable and powerful and all the things that I've ever wanted to be,
Yeah.
I was. Um, and then on the final day, and you read that part where it's like, oh, I'm done in 3 hours. And
Yeah.
so you start to slow down. You're like, I I wanna take this in. In
Yeah.
fact, what if I turn around and I run back? Like I could do that. Like I haven't
Yeah.
I don't owe anybody anything, but I do have to get back to work and I have to, go parent and all the things,
Yeah. It's like I should
Um,
be done, but I don't want to be
like
done.
yeah, exactly, exactly. It's so I don't know, but running across America, Russia, no, like
Yeah.
there's no way. You know, Canada was my Everest.
Yeah. Yeah. And thinking about like other sort of North American runs, I mean, there's so much of our country that there isn't even roads. Like you're kind of limited with
Yeah.
being able to run, say north to south or something like that across Canada. Like you just can't because there's no roads for most of that, unfortunately. But
Right. Exactly, exactly.
yeah.
But big stretch goals. I mean, everybody's got their Everest, right? Is
Yeah.
it a marathon? Is it running a 100-mile race? Is it, losing the 50 pounds? Man, fight for it like your life depended upon it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, it's worth every single second.
Amazing.
Hmm.
So you had mentioned that maybe one day wanting to get back into competitive ultra racing, but what does running
Yeah.
look like for you these days? It's been, 2 years now since you've completed your record breaking run across Canada. Yeah. What have you been up to lately with running?
Well, the last 2.5 years have been crap. Like I alluded in the book that, the year following, man, I never expected the lows to be that low. I almost feel that having a goal your entire life, this whole Everest, what happens when you get to the top of Everest?
Yeah.
You're like, now what? You
Yeah.
know, um, as well too, you look in the mirror the next day and no problems have been solved. Like you're still insecure, right? And you're
Yeah.
like, oh, that's not what I expected. And so, the next year was kind of it was a tough year mentally. By
Hmm.
far the hardest year of my life, by far.
Yeah.
Um, but I always believe too that you kind of pay for the sins of your past. And man, I've run a lot in my life, and I needed back surgery. So I got back surgery about 8 months ago. Recovery from major back surgery is pretty major. And so
Hmm.
recovery and getting my body back to this, you take it for granted. You take it for granted, what regular runs or cycles and core work and, this muscle firing and this one relaxing and this one doing this and it's getting there. But I'm a long ways away. I'm wanting to run well before I run long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I have these stretch goals next year. I'd like to get back to ultra running, and competitive ultra running. 10 years ago, I set the Canadian 24-hour record, of 257 kilometers at the World Championships in Torino, Italy. And next year will be the anniversary of that, and it still stands. The Canadian record still stands. Um, I think it'd be kind of cool 10 years later to compete with myself 10 years earlier.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'd like to go and break that record again.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's possible. I'm a relative senior citizen now. That's not
Yeah.
true. That's not true. But in running, I am. And so,
Yeah.
but
In
wouldn't it be,
sport, my goodness. Yeah.
oh, but wouldn't it be an interesting, difficult, fun thing to try and go like,
Yeah.
Dave, you don't have the speed as much anymore, but you know what you got? A lot of other crap going on.
Hmm.
And man, you've learned a lot in the last 10 years. And I would
Yeah.
love to break 257,
Yeah.
so every day I'm saying a minimum of 3 hours, I'm devoting towards a build.
Yeah.
Where's that build going to end? 258, I hope. You know, I,
Yep.
I hope so, but that's where I'm at. So I'm not running any more than an hour and a half right now because I want to run well before I run
Yeah.
long.
Yeah.
But I do believe that the thirst for long is there, and I'll get there.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well,
Yeah.
good luck to you, and I definitely can't wait to hear how that goes, and hope that it works out, and hope that you're able to accomplish that goal.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you.
yeah, so I know that we're at the end of our time here, and it's unfortunate because I feel like I have so many more things that I could ask you about, but
Mm.
we set a time limit here for a reason. So, just before we wrap up and sign off, where can people, find you, connect with you, get a copy of your book and give it a read, because it is definitely worth a read.
Mm.
And where can they catch that documentary that you mentioned?
Yeah. So yeah, you can find me on Instagram and in Facebook. My Instagram tag is Run Proctor. My website's runproctor.net. Yeah, my book, it's the easiest place to get it is on Amazon. There's an Audible copy as well too. Really great voice recording with an actor. And I tried to do it myself. I just couldn't do it.
No.
No, no. But yeah, if you want to give that a go, and then reach out to me, please, on Instagram, or Facebook, just reach out to me via Messenger and let me know what you think. If you have any questions, I love connecting with readers. And the movie is, we don't know when it comes to distribution. We would love to be on Netflix or on Disney Plus or
Yeah, that'd be
whatever that
great.
is. But
Yep.
we'll see how well it does in the film festival circuit. It's really, I love it. I think it's great, but of course I'm biased, and so we'll see how the circuit goes this year,
Yeah.
and yeah, I look forward to hitting up some red carpets and on and so forth. But it's it's
Oh,
it's
fun.
it's cool. I think ultra marathons have become a big thing recently, and I think that people are curious about what
Yep.
what does something like that look like. Yeah,
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me, sharing, so much stuff like logistics and some of those, nutrition questions answered, and then just, the bigger picture of mindset, and, how we live our lives as runners, and how those things are so interconnected. I think there's just so many great lessons to be learned there. And for
Mm,
anybody listening, so much more of this kind of stuff in the book. Like, you really have to give it a read.
Well, thanks so much. I totally appreciate it, Stephanie.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening to this week's episode. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording it. And that's all for this week. We'll see you in next week's episode. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.